Welcome back to Farming Smarter 2020 for day 2 of our special online edition of the conference. We've got another power-packed day of information to help expand your mind and your production practices. Our platform works the same way. Hopefully it feels familiar for you today. Just remember to always push play for live sessions and to click on additional sessions to get to the question and answer time, where you can ask questions in the chat box on the side or in person through the Zoom capability. We want to let you know again about the opportunity of a Farming Smarter subscription, a chance to be connected to great ag research done by the team year-round, plus gain some excellent savings. Becoming a Farming Smart subscriber gives you access to all Farming Smarter can offer, plus more than $15,000 in discounts from our Farming Smart partners. It's a chance to get free first access to new research, continuing education credits, and an opportunity to meet with Farming Smarter staff one-on-one during the winter months. Consider that and look for more details on the platform. Also, remember, you can visit our exhibitors by clicking on the exhibitor booth tab. They've got videos, information, and folks there you can talk to about all their products and services. And try out the networking area to track down neighbors or make new connections with other people attending here or even the speakers. You can have private chats, group meetings, or even just get some contact details. Also, feel free to tweet or post to your social media about this event with the hashtag FSConf, that's C-O-N-F, 20. So again, hashtag FSConf20. A couple of other housekeeping notes that before we get started, you will be asked for your feedback with an evaluation form you'll see here on the platform and through your email box. Remember, we do appreciate your input for planning any future events. The 4-H online auction is still underway. What a great chance to get some Christmas shopping done and support the Southern 4-H region all at the same time with just a few clicks. So head to Ritchie Brothers to do your bidding on the wide variety of wonderful items donated so generously by 4-H supporters. Speaking of supporters, we've certainly appreciated all of our Farming Smarter Conference sponsors and partners who made the move with us to totally online. And a big thanks, of course, to Jamie Putchinger and Morton Molyneux for their extra work in pulling all of this platform work together. We know the program coming up today is going to be a valuable investment of time for your farm. We'll start things off today with our program by heading east, and I mean further east than Saskatchewan, to learn about a problem that is local, national, and global. We're very pleased to have with us Peter Sikkema, a faculty member in the Department of Plant Agriculture for the University of Guelph's Ridgetown campus. Peter has teaching, research, and extension responsibilities there. His research focuses on weed management in corn, soybean, dry beans, and cereals. Of particular note to farmers, however, are the current investigations into herbicide resistance. Peter and his team are world leaders in the quest to address this pressing issue with practical and innovative solutions that Peter enjoys sharing with producer audiences right across the country. Peter has received numerous awards for teaching, research, and extension, and has been named a fellow of 4 scientific societies. We are looking forward to his presentation today as he looks at the idea of herd immunity to glyphosate and tells us what they're learning about resistance in Ontario. Here's Peter Sikkema.
Good morning. In my presentation this morning, I'd like to share with you the experience that we have had with glyphosate-resistant weeds in Ontario. The first glyphosate-resistant weed in Canada was glyphosate-resistant giant ragweed. This happens to be Grant Crawford's farm, and he called me one day and asked me if I would go to his farm because he had trouble controlling giant ragweed with glyphosate. Grant farms on Pelee Island in the middle of Lake Erie, and so I went across on the ferry, and very fortuitously for me, the week before I went to his farm, he had sprayed his winter wheat stubble with glyphosate. You'll see 2 giant ragweed biotypes on the picture, And if you're not familiar with glyphosate-resistant giant ragweed, you would think that the plant on the right is going to die and the plant on the left is the resistant biotype. In reality, it's just the opposite. The plant on the right has such a rapid necrotic response to glyphosate that glyphosate doesn't get translocated in sufficient quantities throughout the plant, and it will regrow, flower, set seed, and return seed to the soil, whereas the plant on the left, glyphosate will be translocated throughout the plant, and it will eventually die and disappear. The second glyphosate-resistant weed in Canada was glyphosate-resistant Canada Fleabane, and here you can see the density that some farmers in Ontario deal with this weed biotype. The third glyphosate-resistant weed in Ontario was glyphosate-resistant common ragweed. This happens to be Mike Lavin's farm in Essex County, and that is the density of glyphosate-resistant common ragweed that he deals with on his farm. And the fourth glyphosate-resistant weed in Ontario is glyphosate-resistant waterhemp. This, my friends, is a commercial soybean field, and that is the density of waterhemp that some farmers deal with. So the question is what do you need for resistance to develop? And there's two things. First of all, there must be resistant biotypes within the field, or they have to be imported into the field. The resistance must be a heritable trait that's passed on to the next generation, and the initial frequency of the resistance mutation in the population will be a factor in how rapidly the gene accumulates within the population and becomes a problem. And the second thing you need for resistance to develop is selection pressure. And that is influenced by the frequency of herbicide application and the efficacy of the herbicide. So the question is why did this problem develop in Ontario? And the answer is pretty straightforward, and it was the over-reliance or exclusive reliance on glyphosate for weed management. So what contributed to the overuse of glyphosate? And the primary reason why there was so much glyphosate used in the province of Ontario was the widespread adoption of Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybean and the repeated application of glyphosate for weed management. Some secondary reasons that contributed to the overuse of glyphosate was the increased use of no-till. And in Ontario, no-till crop production is completely reliant on glyphosate as a burn-down herbicide. Some farmers have tight rotations. They may grow continuous Roundup Ready corn or continuous Roundup Ready soybean. They could have a two-crop rotation of Roundup Ready corn followed by Roundup Ready soybean. They could have a three-crop rotation of two Roundup Ready crops, corn and soybean, followed by winter wheat. And some farmers have a two-crop rotation of Roundup Ready soybean and wheat. The bottom line is Roundup Ready crops are widely grown in the province of Ontario. The fourth reason is the reduced use, and in some case, no use of other herbicide modes of action. And finally, what also contributed to the overuse of glyphosate was many farmers did not proactively implement integrated weed management programs on their farms, and there was almost a complete or over-reliance on herbicides for weed management. So when we think back 25 years, in retrospect, who was responsible for the evolution of glyphosate-resistant weeds in Ontario? And first of all, I'll point the finger at myself and the public weed scientists. Secondly, the glyphosate manufacturers and distributors and retailers were partially responsible, as well as farmers. So in terms of public weed scientists, and I will only speak for myself, not my colleagues in the province, I thought that the diverse crop rotation crop production system in Ontario would reduce the selection pressure for glyphosate-resistant weeds. The most common crop rotation in Ontario is corn, soybean, and winter wheat. And in addition to that, there are more than 50 other crops grown in the province of Ontario, things like forages, spring cereals, dry beans, processing vegetables. And I thought that our diverse crop rotation would reduce the selection intensity for glyphosate-resistant weeds. What I did not realize, the number of farmers who would grow continuous Roundup Ready corn or continuous Roundup Ready soybean, and the number of farmers that would have a two-crop rotation of simply Roundup Ready corn followed by Roundup Ready soybean. And what I also did not realize was the impact of windblown seeds and the multiple ways that weed seeds move across the province. So just to illustrate this point, in 2010, all that we knew was that there were 8 farms in Essex County in Ontario with glyphosate-resistant Canada Fleabane. In 2011, it moved from only 1 county in 2010 to 6 counties in 2011. So in one growing season, glyphosate-resistant Canada Fleabane moved at least 300 kilometers in that 1 year. Then in 2012, it was found in 2 additional counties. 2013, it was found for the first time on the east side of Toronto. In 2014, it was in 28 counties. And in 2015, glyphosate-resistant Canada Fleabane was found in 30 counties across Ontario, from Essex County in the southwest, adjacent to the Michigan border, to Glengarry County, adjacent to the Quebec border. So in 5 growing seasons, glyphosate-resistant Canada Fleabane moved more than 800 kilometers across the primary agricultural producing region in southern Ontario. So what started out as a localized, albeit a challenging problem for farmers in Essex County in 2010, now occurs right across the province, and it's occurring at densities that are causing substantial yield losses right across the province. The second group that was responsible for the evolution of glyphosate-resistant weeds were the glyphosate manufacturers, distributors, and retailers. This is a manuscript that was published in Weed Technology in 1997 by 4 weed scientists that worked for Monsanto. And in this peer-reviewed study, they concluded that the complex manipulations that were required for the development of glyphosate-resistant crops are unlikely to be duplicated in nature to evolve glyphosate-resistant weeds. I think that for many of you in the audience, you will think, well, that was just not very smart. I was in my 30s during the 1990s. I was in my current position for only 4 years at the time, and I have to admit that I thought these scientists were right. Here's a newsletter published by Monsanto by a fellow by the name of Brett Bussler in June 1996. And in that newsletter, he wrote, "There is no need for residual herbicides in the Roundup Ready system." And he went on to write that tank mixes with other post-emergent soybean products are not recommended. And finally, some farmers overuse the technology, resulting in the selection of glyphosate-resistant weeds. So I'm going to just briefly show you some of the research that we've done on 2 of these weed biotypes, waterhemp and Canada Fleabane, simply because they are the biggest challenge for Ontario farmers. This happens to be one of our research sites on Walpole Island. And you can see that there's soybean experiments on the left-hand side of that tree row and corn experiments on the right-hand side, where you see the lime green color on the right hand, or on the left hand side, that would be herbicide treatments that provided poor control of glyphosate-resistant water hemp. And then the deep green would be herbicide treatments that provided very good control of glyphosate-resistant water hemp. So in terms of the history, in 2014, poor control of water hemp was reported in a field in Lambton County. Seed was collected, plants were grown in the greenhouse, sprayed with glyphosate, and this is what we found. So Michael Shriver, a previous grad student of mine, collected seed from more than 50 fields, and you can see in fields 25 and 27, they were sprayed with glyphosate in the greenhouse and they died. Just as we would expect with the application of glyphosate. Really disappointingly, seed collected in field 21 and 46 were sprayed with glyphosate, and you can see that they survived. So we knew conclusively that we had glyphosate-resistant water hemp in the province. All that we knew in 2014, only 6 years ago, was that there was one field in the southwestern corner of Lambton County with glyphosate-resistant water hemp. In 2015, it was found in Essex and Kent County. In 2017, it was found in Middlesex. In 2018, it was found in Huron, Wentworth, and Haldimand. And in 2019, it was found for the first time on the east side of Toronto in Northumberland County. So the question is why is this weed an increasing problem? And there's multiple reasons. First, there's the trend to reduced strip and no-till crop production, and reduced tillage favors small-seeded broadleaf weeds like water hemp. Secondly, water hemp is an amazing weed. It's a dioecious species. That simply means that you have separate male and female plants, and that results in wide genetic diversity within this species, and there could be genes that confer resistance to herbicides. There's been rapid evolution of multiple herbicide resistance in water hemp. In Ontario, there's 4-way resistance. In the United States, there's 7-way resistance. In Ontario, water hemp has evolved resistance to the group 2, 5, 9, and 14 herbicides. And water hemp is a relatively competitive species. It has a rapid growth rate, high fecundity, or you could say high seed production. It has prolonged emergence from May in the spring all the way through October in the fall. And it has seed dormancy anywhere from 2 up to 20 years. So the question is why is water hemp moving across the province of Ontario? And I took these 6 pictures over the last few years. This happens to be a John Deere dealership near Cottam, Ontario. I would have never thought that where they refurbish John Deere combines would be where you get glyphosate-resistant water hemp. And obviously where they washed this combine, water hemp seed flowed off the cement pad into the adjacent soybean field. And this farmer inherited this problem simply because his field was adjacent to a John Deere dealership. Here, I'm quite confident that the water hemp was introduced with a contaminated combine. And this field is just north of Clinton, Ontario. That happens to be the University of Guelph pickup truck. And really interesting to me, I walked in this cornfield and there is only water hemp in a semicircle right around the field entrance. So it may have came in on a contaminated plow, cultivator, bulk fertilizer spreader, I don't know, but we can be quite confident that it was introduced on some sort of contaminated field equipment. This happens to be a soybean field along the Grand River in Haldimand County. I spoke to the grower and you can see the brown strip adjacent to the river. That is the only place on his farm that he has glyphosate-resistant water hemp. And where he has glyphosate-resistant water hemp is the extent to which the Grand River overflowed that spring and flooded his soybean field. Water hemp, just like the name would imply, has seeds that float in water. It's moved in from field edges. This happens to be in Lambton County. In Lambton County, the water hemp is almost genetically identical to the water hemp that's been in Ontario for more than a century. And something happened in the last 10 to 15 years. This plant that normally only grew along open water courses has changed, and it's now adapted to our corn and soybean production systems. And finally, this is a picture from a farm in Essex County. Amazingly, the water hemp in Essex County is almost genetically identical to the water hemp in Missouri. So somehow, water hemp seed from Missouri crossed Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan to get to Ontario. And the thought is that it was brought into Ontario on migratory birds. So why is water hemp resistant to glyphosate? And there's two reasons. First of all, it's gene amplification. On Walpole Island, 70% of the resistant biotypes have gene amplification, and they have an average of 9 copies of the DNA that codes for the EPSPS enzyme in plants, and 2 plants had up to 29 copies of the DNA that codes for the EPSPS enzyme. Really interesting, in Essex County, there is gene amplification, but only 52% of the resistant biotypes have gene amplification. And instead of 9 extra copies, it's only 4. And in the Essex County biotypes, it's thought that multiple independent amplification events have arisen and spread through the population. Just to show this diagrammatically, you'll see the yellow on the DNA chromosomes, and that's the codes for the EPSPS enzyme. And so in a normal biotype, there's only 1 strand of DNA that codes for the enzyme. Glyphosate's represented by the red diamonds. It binds to that enzyme, it stops the shikimate biosynthetic pathway, amino acid production stop, and the weeds die on your farm. In the resistant water hemp, there's multiple strands of DNA that code for the EPSPS enzyme. You spray glyphosate, which is once again represented by the 9 red diamonds, but there's simply so much of the enzyme in the plant, the shikimate biosynthetic pathway functions normally, and you have a resistant biotype. And there's a second mechanism of resistance, and that's an altered target site, and it's a proline to serine amino acid substitution at position 106 of the EPSPS enzyme. And so this is found more frequently in Essex County than in Walpole Island. But not only do we have glyphosate-resistant water hemp, there is also multiple resistant water hemp in Ontario. And in this research conducted by Mike Schreiber, you can see that in field 22, that biotype is resistant to both Roundup as well as Pursuit, a group 2 herbicide. So what's the mechanism of resistance to group 2 resistant water hemp? And there are 2 reasons. That it's an altered target site, and the primary one that I will just talk about today is a tryptophan to leucine amino acid substitution at position 574. And that's really important because that specific amino acid substitution confers resistance to the sulfonylureas, the imidazolinones, as well as the triazolopyrimidines. So just to show it to you in a greenhouse study that was conducted by Lauren Benoit, here you can see that the plant on the left was sprayed with Pursuit, an imidazolinone herbicide. The one in the middle was sprayed with Classic, a sulfonylurea, and the one on the right-hand side was sprayed with First Rate, a triazolopyrimidine. So if you have the tryptophan to leucine amino acid substitution, it confers resistance to all 3 group 2 herbicide families. So not only do we have group 9 and group 2 resistant water hemp, there are also biotypes that are resistant to atrazine. So this is some research that was done by Mike Schreiber. Notice that it's field 22. in all three of the pictures. It's resistant to glyphosate on the left, imizethapyr in the middle, and atrazine on the right. So what's the mechanism of resistance to atrazine? And so there's two mechanisms that confer resistance to the group 5 herbicides. The first one is enhanced metabolism. And really interesting, this mechanism confers resistance to atrazine, but metribuzin is still effective. I almost never show herbicide structures when I do a presentation for farmers, but this is simply fascinating. So you can see the chemical structure of metribuzin, a group 5 herbicide, and I put a box around the oxygen at the number 1 position. This happens to be Doug Nelson's farm in Essex County. You spray metribuzin and you get near perfect control of water hemp on his farm. 100 meters away, we did experiments in corn. We sprayed atrazine, and you can see that the water hemp is resistant. So the question is you have two triazine herbicides. One is works on this biotype, and the other one is resistant. And it's because of the chlorine at the number 1 position on the atrazine molecule. This provides a binding site for an enzyme called glutathione S-transferase. Glutathione S-transferase breaks down atrazine in a non-phytotoxic metabolite, and you have a resistant biotype. Really interesting to me, and I didn't know this only 2 years ago. In other parts of Ontario, there's a second mechanism that confers resistance to the group 5 herbicides, and it's an altered target site. And it's a serine to glycine amino acid substitution at position 264. And this confers resistance to both the symmetrical and the asymmetrical triazines. So 2 years ago, I asked my technician to just grow out a number of seed lots of water hemp in the greenhouse and to spray them with both atrazine and metribuzin. And all as I wanted was a slide to show that water hemp in Ontario is resistant to atrazine but sensitive to metribuzin. And I was right for 95% of the farms in Ontario with water hemp. Really interesting to me, the water hemp biotype from Petrolia, where we sprayed metribuzin post-emergence, you can see it was not injured by the herbicide application, whereas on Walpole Island and at Cottam, as I showed you in the previous pictures, metribuzin provides control. I shared this information with people in the industry and they said, nice research, Peter, but nobody applies metribuzin post-emergence because you would kill your soybean. And they are correct. And the reason why we do the trials with the herbicides applied post-emergence in the greenhouse, it's simply easier to do. So we repeated the work and we applied it pre-emergence. And you can see that this altered target site confers resistance to metribuzin both pre-emergence and post-emergence. So based on that greenhouse research, we went and did a number of field trials. And here you can see the rate of metribuzin from 280 grams per hectare up to 4,480. And if you just focus on the 560 gram rate, which is about 8 ounces active per acre, in Essex County, we're getting 95% control of water hemp with 560 grams of metribuzin. Amazingly, in Lambton County near Petrolia, with the same herbicide, we got 3% control. Just to show you what it looked like in the field this past summer in 2020, here's the control with metribuzin in Essex County with Sencor at 560 grams per hectare. And this is a picture I took in Lambton County this past summer. And notice the high level of resistance that's conferred by that amino acid substitution. And the last herbicide family I'll talk about is group 14, resistant water hemp. This is some research that was conducted by Brittany Hedges. She applied 6 different Group 14 herbicides, Blazer, Reflex, Cobra, AIM, Aragon, and Blackhawk, which represent 4 different herbicide families within the Group 14 herbicides. And in field 1607, so that was seed collected in 2016, the 7th field that Brittany collected seed from. And you'll see that this biotype is resistant to all 4 herbicide families within the Group 14 herbicides. So really interesting, most plants have 2 nuclear encoded PPO enzymes. They are called PPX1 and PPX2. One functions in the chloroplast, the other in the mitochondria, but water hemp is different. It only has 1 gene, PPX2L, that codes for the enzymes in both locations, and therefore only 1 mutation can confer resistance to the Group 14 herbicides. It happens to be a codon deletion at glycine 210 of the PPO enzyme, and this resistance mechanism confers resistance to the Group 14 herbicides applied post, but the soil applied herbicides still work. So up to last year, we now know that there's 13 counties in Ontario with glyphosate-resistant water hemp. In 7 of those counties, it's resistance to Group 2, 5, 9, and 14 herbicides. In 1 county, Wentworth, the blue, it's resistant to Group 2, 5, and 9 herbicides. In 3 counties, Elgin, Norfolk, and Wellington, it's resistant to the Group 2, 9, and 14. And in 2 counties, Brant and Northumberland, it's resistant to only 2 herbicide modes of action, the Group 2 and 9 herbicides. So now I'll just completely switch gears and look at how our Ontario farmers controlling these weed biotypes. So glyphosate-resistant water hemp, I said earlier, is relatively competitive. It's not as competitive as some weed species. In our trials in Ontario, on average, it caused a 17% yield loss in corn and a 43% yield loss in soybean. So first of all, looking at water hemp in corn, the critical water hemp-free period in corn is from emergence up to V6 or the 8-leaf stage. I took these pictures last summer. The average corn yield in Ontario is 164 bushels per acre. The average selling price from 2013 to 2017 was $4.86 a bushel. So corn's worth about $800 an acre. This is Craig King's farm just outside of Newbury, Ontario. That's what corn looks like with a good water hemp control program. This is where no herbicide was applied. And I think you would agree with me, there's 100% yield loss on his farm if he does not implement any weed management tactics to control this weed biotype. So we looked at a range of soil-applied herbicides in corn, and you'll see that broad-strike dicamba, atrazine, Frontier, On Guard, Dual, Zidua, Marksman, and Prime Extra provided less than 80% control. Then Callisto, Converge, Integrity, and Lumax provided control in the 80s, and the most effective herbicide was Acuron at 91% control. Here you can see one experiment. There's the control plot where no herbicide was applied. And right beside it, you can see the control provided by Acuron. And in the trials that we've done, the average control was 91%. So now I'll flip to soybean. This, once again, is a commercial soybean field in Ontario. That's the density of water hemp that some farmers are dealing with. Once again, I took these pictures just last summer. The average soybean yield in Ontario is 46 bushels per acre. The average selling price is $12.90. So soybean are worth about $587 per acre. And once again, I think you'd agree with me. I took this picture only a few meters away from the plot on the left. there's 100% yield loss in soybean in our most competitive environments due to water hemp interference. I think the best way to control multiple resistant water hemp in soybean is to use a two-pass program. It could be boundary, authority, supreme, or fierce, applied pre-emergence. And in this particular experiment, it was followed by enlist duo, applied post-emergence. And you can see we got 99% control. So just to show you one farm, here's the Roundup treated plot. Obviously, it's glyphosate-resistant water hemp. And here's a two-pass program of boundary applied pre-emergence, followed by enlist applied post-emergence. Now I'll flip to the other weed, and that is glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. And once again, just take note of the pressure that some Ontario farmers are dealing with. So now I'm going to do something that I wished every presenter would not do, and that is where they put too much information on one slide. But I'm doing it for a reason. So in our initial research, we looked at herbicides that provide control as a pre-plant burn down. Roundup was tank mixed with 2,4-D, AIM, Liberty, Gramoxone, Aragon, Integrity, First Rate, Classic, Volterra, and Guardian Plus. And you can see that none of those herbicides provided 90% control. Then we looked at herbicides that would have both burn down and pre-emergence residual activity for the whole growing season. And Roundup was tank mixed with Classic, First Rate, Lorox, Sencor, Broad Strike, Pursuit, Command, Fierce, Guardian Plus, and Conquest. And once again, none of those provided 90% control. And then we looked at herbicides that could be applied post-emergence in soybean. And Roundup was tank mixed with Blazer, Reflex, Bassgram, Pinnacle, Classic, First Rate, Pursuit, Clean Sweep, and Flex Star. And none of those provided 90% control. Ladies and gentlemen, that was every broadleaf herbicide registered in the province of Ontario at the time that we did this research. So we decided that the basis for managing glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane in soybean was Roundup plus Aragon. That's heat for you in Western Canada, or Roundup plus Integrity. And you could challenge me and say, Peter, why didn't you use Gramoxone? The answer is real simple. Gramoxone is no longer registered in agricultural crops in Ontario. And why didn't you use Sencor? It had 85% control. And the reason is it's too expensive. And at the rate that we used on sandy soils that have high pH, it results in too much crop injury. So I think that Aragon or heat is the starting point for managing glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. However, there is variable control. I summarized 90 experiments that we did, and in 58% of those experiments, Roundup plus Aragon provided greater than 90% control. However, in 9%, the control was between 80 and 89%. Another 9, it was between 70 and 79. 8%, it was between 50 and 69% control. And the exact same herbicide that provided 100% control in 5 experiments provided as low as 5% control on other farms in Ontario. Just to show you what it looked like in the field, here's an experiment we did where we had really good control with Roundup plus Aragon. And on the right-hand side, you can see the poor control with the exact same herbicide sprayed with the same water volume, same nozzle, same everything. And I think you would agree with me that if you had the control in the field on the right-hand side, I would not be on your Christmas list in December of this year. So we have decided that we had to use 3-way tank mixes to control glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane and soybean. This happens to be Walt McLean's farm, pretty heavy fleabane pressure. Notice the excellent, and I would say consistent control of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane with a tank mix of Roundup plus heat plus metribuzin. So what about the control of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane in Extend soybean? Extend soybean have a gene that confers resistance to dicamba. And if you had asked me 4 years ago, I would have said that dicamba was bulletproof for the control of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. And here you can see why I would have said that. Near perfect control with dicamba in Extend soybean. I found this quote. It goes like this: "The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right." We all need to think it possible that we may be mistaken. We all need to be not too sure that we are right. And that sure applies to me. This is what a typical Canada fleabane plant looks like. It has one stem. And in some biotypes, when you spray dicamba, you kill the growing point of the Canada fleabane plant. And then instead of having one stem, as you can see in this picture, you have this plant with 6 different stems. So I saw that for the first time 3 or 4 years ago. This happens to be another farm in Kent County. Here's the control plot. Dicamba at 300 grams per hectare and 600 grams per hectare. And I think you would agree with me, that's pretty disappointing control. We reviewed all of the research we did, and there for sure is a rate response to dicamba. And we've concluded that you have to use the high rate of dicamba, and then you can improve the control even further by adding heat or argon to the tank mix. So the question is, do grower management practices influence the selection of herbicide-resistant weeds on their farm? So I happened to be collecting weed seed with one of my graduate students a number of years ago. This happens to be glyphosate-resistant giant ragweed. You can see the University of Guelph pickup truck in the background. My graduate student collected weed seed, giant ragweed seed in the field on the far side of the road, and he assigned me to collect seed from the field in the foreground. Obviously, I stopped. I went back to the pickup truck, got my camera, and took this picture. So there's 2 different farms. The farm on the left is pretty clean, and you can see the giant ragweed on the right. And so that raises the question, why is the field on the left so much cleaner? So we spoke to both of the farmers. The farmer on the left had a corn, soybean, wheat rotation, used conventional tillage, and glyphosate was used in both the corn and the soybean crop. In contrast to that, the farmer on the right grew continuous Roundup Ready soybeans. It's no-till, and the only herbicide used was glyphosate. The point that I want to make is that grower weed management practices do influence the selection for herbicide-resistant weeds on their farm. So in terms of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane, our research indicates, and practices by Ontario farmers show, that this is a manageable problem. So I took this picture a few years ago. I stopped my car on the side of the road. I stood on the yellow line in the middle of the road. Don't do this, it could be bad for your health. Anyways, I turned my body 90 degrees to the east, and I think you'd agree with me that this is a train wreck. So this farm is 100 acres. It happens to be at the corner of the road that you can see, and there's a concession that goes to the left and the further down. And there's glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. I think this farmer had greater than a 75% yield loss across the entire farm. Now keep in mind, fleabane is windblown seed. It's not going to stop at the yellow line on the road. I turned my body 180 degrees to the west, and there's perfect control of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. Obviously, this weed can be managed on Ontario farms. This is a picture I took in 2015. It's the same field as I showed you earlier. Make sure you look at the trees in the background on the right-hand side of the picture. In 2016, the farmer grew corn. This is the same field in 2017. Obviously, this farmer figured out how to manage glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane on his farm. So I will still make the same conclusion. Our research indicates and practices by Ontario farmers show that this is a manageable problem, but Ontario farmers will lose a tremendous amount of money due to yield loss due to glyphosate-resistant weed interference and increased herbicide cost. So the question is can Ontario farmers eliminate this problem through good management? Once again, I was driving in Kent County and I stopped and got out of my car and took this picture. Here you can see the edge of the road. That's almost a monoculture of glyphosate-resistant Canada fleabane. Keep in mind that it's wind-blown seed. I would suggest to you that farmers in Ontario are going to have to deal with this weed biotype indefinitely into the future because it grows in non-cropped areas around the field perimeter. So in terms of glyphosate stewardship, Stephen Powles from the University of Australia says, the University of Western Australia says, cropping systems diversity is the foundation for resistance management. And Pat Tranel from the University of Illinois wrote, we found that grower management practices were the #1 factor that influenced the selection for glyphosate-resistant water hemp on individual farms. I'm going to conclude my presentation by asking you 8 questions. In terms of glyphosate stewardship, would you consider having a diversified crop rotation on your farm? And would you include at least 1 or more non-Roundup Ready crops in your rotation? In Ontario, there are lots of opportunities to do that. It could be identity preserved soybeans, cereals, dry beans, or forages. Just to show you the impact of crop selection on weed management, this happens to be a farm in Essex County where we're working on glyphosate-resistant water hemp control. On the left-hand side are our experiments. Here you can see water hemp in soybean in the picture on the lower left. There's up to 4,000 water hemp per square meter on this farm. And here you can see the winter wheat crop around the perimeter of the field. This is in the absence of any herbicide. So winter wheat completely outcompetes water hemp, and that's the contribution of a diverse crop rotation on your farm in terms of managing this weed. Would you consider strategically incorporating some of the alternate or new technologies when they become available? As I said earlier, we grow a lot of Roundup Ready crops in Ontario. I would really encourage farmers to use some of the other technology that's available. It could be Liberty Link corn, Enlist corn. It could be Liberty Link soybean, Extend soybean, Enlist soybean, and HT3 soybean have just been registered in the province. Number 3 is, would you consider applying multiple herbicide modes of action on every acre every year? You could use a 2-pass weed control program of a pre-herbicide followed by post, or you could use a herbicide tank mix. In research done in Australia, they say the Perth model predicts that herbicide mixtures are the more robust strategy to minimize the risk of resistance evolution. Number 4 is, would you consider including tillage at strategic points in your diversified crop rotation? I'm not a big tillage guy, but tillage can be one component of an integrated weed management program. Number 5 is, would you consider seeding a cover crop after winter wheat harvest to reduce Canada fleabane emergence? So this happens to be the farm where I grew up in southern Ontario. My brother grows winter wheat. The day that he combines the winter wheat, he puts in a cover crop of peas and oats. He takes that off, let's say on September 15, puts it in the silo for the dairy herd. The day that he takes off the oats and the peas, he will put in a winter cover crop of cereal rye. So my brother now has 4 cash generating crops in a 24-month period, where my dad, who was a very good farmer, would have had 2 cash generating crops in 24 months. Just to show you the impact of cover crops on Canada fleabane, here you can see an experiment where we had 17 different cover crop blends. The year after applying a cover crop after winter wheat combining, notice on the picture on the lower left, that's where no cover crop was planted after combining wheat the previous year. This is corn. The following year, in the absence of any herbicide to control Canada fleabane, and you can see the effect of a cover crop as one component of an integrated weed management program. Number 6 is, would you consider making near perfect weed control your objective in your diversified crop rotation to minimize weed seed return to the soil? I think that we can do it with the weed management tools that we have in Ontario. Notice the near perfect control of fleabane in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. Number 7 is, would you consider maintaining detailed weed management or herbicide records to minimize the repetitive use of the same mode of action? And number 8 is, would you consider developing a multi-year herbicide-resistant management plan for each field on your farm to minimize the repeated use of herbicides with the same mode of action? To summarize, I'm once again taking a quote from Lucy in Australia. He wrote, "Rotating herbicides is good. Mixing herbicides is great. Mixing and rotating herbicides is best." My hope in terms of glyphosate stewardship is that farmers will implement weed management practices that limit the selection of additional glyphosate-resistant weeds. This will ensure the usefulness of glyphosate and Roundup Ready crops for many years in the future. I would like to thank all of the people that work with me. You can see that I've had 17 graduate students work on glyphosate-resistant weeds in Ontario, 3 technicians, the summer research assistants, as well as the funding agencies. And my final thought for you is, if you do not have glyphosate resistance on your farm yet, adopt integrated weed management now and use glyphosate judiciously at strategic points in your long-term crop rotation. Thank you very much.